if you'd like.
Oh, okay. So I'm the founder of 360 Perimeter Counseling, and I offer individual therapy to those who suffer with addiction and mental health disorders, but also their family members. I really like to take a family approach because addiction is a family disease. So in addition to individual counseling, I also provide therapy groups, therapy and educational groups for family members. So Tuesday nights, I lead a group for family members who are dealing with addiction in the family system, regardless of if their loved one is in active addiction or in recovery or bouncing back and forth, right? I also am launching a group for those who suffer with addiction starting on October 1st. It'll be a closed group. It'll be a condensed program virtually provided of my curriculum and workbooks that I've made that are being published, and we're going to be able to get feedback from clients so that I can do a final edit. I'm really excited about these things. I'm really excited to be here to share with you the topic we're talking about tonight, which is a journey through the stages of change. And it will provide you with a lot of the elements that I believe are crucial to success, not only for the one who's suffering with the addiction, but also for the family members, because they're in this too. We're all in the recovery process, so we all need to be making forward progress. I really believe in what I teach, not only because of the fascination and the education that I've gotten about what addiction does to people, what it does to us individually and also our family systems, but also because of my own ability to maintain recovery for over 11 years now. So the elements that I talk about are those elements that I've used and other people who are also succeeding at overcoming this addiction. So I'm going to share my slides now, and we'll just jump right in. Okay, so as I said, we're going to go through a journey on the stages of change. And that is my contact information if you wish to ask me any other questions or contact me about my practice. So, I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to say that addiction in the family is an all-consuming problem. There's no easy solution. Solutions are not black and white. There is lots of gray area. Every family system has unique challenges. But I'm here to tell you that there is a way to overcome addiction in the family. And although we all do have differences, we have much more in common. And so the outline and the plan for success can be applied to the masses. And then we just fine-tune those plans to meet the needs of individual family systems. A major element to success of any change is to increase your education, because education is vital in order to broaden our perspective, to help us gain an objective view, to separate from the emotion of the situation. It's important that we're able to see where we have been, recognize where we are, and where we want to go in order to make lasting change in anything. Because life is all about change. It's a constant change. But tonight, of course, we're going to talk about change as it relates to addiction in the family. So specific topics of discussion I will cover will be the stages of change. I'm also going to identify and define what it means to recycle the stages of change, both for the addict and for the family member. And then I will conclude by conveying to you the importance of adopting a holistic recovery lifestyle. And this is not just a cliche. This is vital to success in not only getting through the stages of change, but overcoming any problem in life, that we adopt this type of lifestyle, and I'll explain that more. Now, I do want to mention something. You'll notice that I refer to a person who has a substance use disorder as an addict on this slide. I want you to be aware that I am conscious of the fact that sometimes people think that's a derogatory term. The only reason that I'm labeling it that way is because I didn't want to type on every slide that I labeled, you'll see, a person who suffers with a substance use disorder. That's a lot of words. So know that I mean that in no derogatory way. I'm referring to people who suffer with addiction as addicts, just for efficiency, and timing, okay? So, there are lots of different models of stages of change, and the ones I'm going to cover tonight have 5 stages. So that is pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. So in the spirit of talking about the importance of increasing our education about whatever problem that we address, here's the point about that. Just making someone aware that there is a progression of stages to change with predictable characteristics in each stage is enough to help a person understand that they're not alone and that success is possible. That's a very important element to motivate someone to want to change, to make them understand that their behaviors are not crazy, that addiction is a beast, and addiction has the power to make people chase their tails. So understanding that empowers people. So tonight I want you to realize, and I'm going to reiterate, the main point of this presentation is that as we progress through the stages of change in addicts, they need to make it all the way to maintenance. It's very common for people to make it to action, be doing really good, and then something happens and the bottom falls out. And they end up recycling all the way back to pre-contemplation. And if they don't get it, if they don't adopt a holistic lifestyle of recovery, it's just this forever cycle of going back and forth, back and forth. What I also want you to understand here is that this isn't only true for the addict. Family members need to make it all the way to maintenance also. And that's regardless of what the addict decides to do. Now, we hope that everybody makes it to maintenance. But the point is that we need to get all the way through the process. So I want us to walk through this process of the stages of change. And hopefully I've made it interesting. So I'm going to take you on a journey through the stages by reading you a poem. And I'm going to read it all the way through first, and I'm going to show you a couple of pictures to put an image in your mind. But I encourage you to use your own imagination, to listen to the words and imagine yourself in your family in the poem, okay? So the poem is titled, Surviving the Swamp. You'll love it here. Let's have some fun. I know the route. I think I'll run. Just take your time. Enjoy the trees. No worry or caution. The path is a breeze. Running wide open, I tripped and I flew into a wasteland of green residue. I waited and toiled, but my body was stuck deep in the throes of a swamp full of muck. I cried and I hollered. Would my family hear? Would they think I'm just playing? Would my desperation be clear? Of course they came running to relieve my duress, to help me get out of this thick, stinking mess. They stood on the edge, apprehensive to leap. My struggles convinced them. The swamp, it was deep. They threw out a rope and began tug of war between the muck in my life and this damn reservoir. The rope was too weak, so they had to jump in. No regard for their safety, they wanted to win. My mom dove head first, deep into the pit. My father sprang second. We were all in the shit. Mom's head underwater and Dad's sinking down. I understood then that we all could not drown. It was then that my family realized this too. If we kept on this way, we'd succumb to the slough. Mom grabbed a root and pulled herself free. Dad followed suit. It just had to be. With them out of danger and on solid ground, my nose just above water, I could now look around. The swamp is my guise. I'm an addict, you see. A fallout of choices is what surrounds me. Let go of the blaming and wondering why. It's time to take action. If not, I will die. I clawed and I slung and I pulled myself free. I earned my way out of the voracious debris. My family prepared to be on the ready. Each step I take now is mindful and steady. The newfound respect for the swamp I created, it unveiled my strength and new life that awaited. My swamp is no longer the threat to elude. Connection to self and support now renewed. No longer oblivious, no longer afraid, no longer trapped in the swamp that I made. Caution we must as we continue from here. Through the journey of change, we can persevere. So I'd like you to let that resonate, and hopefully you were able to bring up some images. And now I'm going to unpack that, and I'm going to analyze it and compare it to the stages of change. I want to make the point now that reflecting on how hard change is and acknowledging our mistakes and also celebrating our small victories allows us to heal, and it empowers us to keep moving forward. So I encourage you to take note of what resonated with you that first time I read that through. And when we meet in Q&A, if you want to ask me any questions or share with me how you related to that, that would be awesome. That's the point, right? So also, if you want to take note of how you might relate to or see yourself in this analysis that we're about to go through, and or your family. So this first stanza represents pre-contemplation. It says, "You'll love it here, let's have some fun. I know the route, I think I'll run. Just take your time, enjoy the trees. No worry or caution, the path is a breeze. Running wide open, I tripped and I flew into a wasteland of green residue." So in this depiction, the family's together. They're on an outing. There's no need to worry. The person running wants to run faster. They want their adrenaline to start pumping, and they end up tripping and falling into the swamp. But at this point, it's an accident, right? There's no problem. So nobody's really mad. The family's understanding. They are there to help. They pull you out of the swamp. They even take you to the doctor. Maybe they even pay for your prescription, whatever you need, right? And we might even blame the falling on the park ranger because they didn't keep the trail up. So how does this look in early addiction? So let's consider someone who's just experimenting with drugs or alcohol or other drugs. They are recreationally using. And either they don't know that there's a budding addiction, or they're in denial about it. They're in pre-contemplation. So either way, they have no awareness. They're taking no accountability. They have no education about the consequences of what they're doing. But if something happens, let's say they get a DUI, or they get a public intox, or they get in a fight and get an assault charge. They feel lost and helpless and they need support, right? So at this point in the stage of the game, while the family is probably disappointed in their choices, they're not really considering yet that there's a pattern of a problem. So at this point, they're still sympathetic, probably supportive financially and emotionally. They might bail them out of jail or pay their fines or blame others. Now here's a key point to make. Most of the time there's some lace of truth in the things that we get distorted. So what we do is we latch onto that piece of truth. So it might be true that the people that they're hanging out with are a bad influence, and had they not been hanging out, this might not have happened. Okay, so there's truth to that. So if that's a one-time incident, we bail them out of jail, no problem, no harm, no foul, we move on. We don't even have to talk about the state of the thing. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what commonly happens in addiction, because addiction is a beast. And so people become distorted. So let's say this turns into a pattern. And let's literally talk about this. If you're a family member and you're walking down this path and you keep having to bail or pull your family member out of the swamp, and or you're falling into, you're getting your shoes and your clothes all messed up, you're going to get tired of this. So either you're going to move forward in the stages of change, or if you're stuck in this stage with them, you're going to find yourself defending them and yourself based on the distortion, right? So you might say something like, well, you go on. I'm not going to follow you down that path anymore. You keep following that swamp, you're on your own. But if you're stuck in pre-contemplation, you're still playing the game because you're still dealing with it. Let's say you might not be there for him falling in the swamp, but you're at home, and when he comes home with this big mass of soppy, wet, swamp water clothes and throws them right in the middle of the living room floor, you're dealing with that, right? So we have to be able to recognize a problem. So we want to keep moving forward. So this stanza represents contemplation. I waited and toiled, but my body was stuck, deep in the throes of a swamp full of muck. I cried and I hollered with my family here. Would they think I'm just playing? Would my desperation be clear? So as a result of throwing caution to the wind, the person in the pond finds himself in the swamp. He's showing a bit of awareness that he may have a problem. He realizes that he's been manipulating his family, and he feels panicked and worried that they might not believe that he wants to change. He's probably also apt to still be distorting things and blaming maybe the park ranger for not putting up a fence around that swamp, or for not removing the root that he tripped on from the trail. But he is getting a little tired of falling in the swamp, so he's considering, at least, that maybe there's a problem. So for an addict in contemplation, like I was just mentioning, there are still lots of distortions like denial, blaming, pity, mixed with a tiny grain of awareness. So let's use the example of someone who has become addicted to opiates as a result of a real injury. Again, here we go. It's laced in truth, so it becomes a deeper problem that doesn't have an easy solution. So he's got mixed feelings about quitting because his pain relief is still his top priority. And he doesn't have much education or awareness about the fact that the pills that he is taking for pain are actually exacerbating his pain because they are messing up his pain receptors, basically, right? So initially, he's afraid to change because, let's face it, using drugs is fun in the beginning. That's why people do it, in the beginning, right? So he enjoys the euphoria that he gets from the pills. And it's been so long that he hasn't had the pills that he really doesn't think he can succeed. And frankly, he's not even sure if it's worth it. Because prior to the pills, he had some unmanaged depression or anxiety. And so the euphoria that he's feeling, he's never felt before. So it looks kind of grim to him because he doesn't have a plan. So family members in contemplation are also still distorting reality. They may be feeling angry or frustrated at the doctor who prescribed the pills, or fixating on fixing the problem, like settling the insurance or suing the person who caused the injury. Now, all of those things do need to be addressed. But the point here is that there's a hyper focus on those things being the problem and a neglecting or denying of the addiction as something that needs to take center stage and be addressed. So, also, as a result of all of this frustration and not knowing what to do, that frustration can be directed at the addict. And it can come out in ways of unrealistic expectations that are driven by ideals. You know, ideals of our family system. You didn't have a kid and imagine that, oh, I'm going to end up having to worry about this addiction and everything's going to fall apart. So if we let our ideals drive the things that we expect, it comes out really distorted, and then we say things like, I didn't raise you that way. If you cared about this family, you just stop. Or advising them, micromanaging them, and telling them exactly what they need to do. Or giving them ultimatums in an attempt to stop the madness because you don't know what else to do and you're just trying to survive. But then at the end of the day, you feel guilty, and that's not really what you wanted to say. And furthermore, it takes the power out of anything you say because there's no follow through, right? Now, I'm going to say this several times throughout this. This is not about blame or shame. This is about awareness. These are hard, cold facts about the realities of addiction and the power that it has to destroy the family. So if we do not become aware of the realities, we can't address them. So we have to talk about it, right? And we all have a part to play. So this also represents contemplation. Of course they came running to relieve my duress, to help me get out of this thick, stinking mess. They stood on the edge, apprehensive to leap. My struggles convinced them, the swamp, it was deep. So he's showing some gratitude that the family's there to help. He's also recognizing that he may be powerless. He's not really buying in completely, but he may be powerless against the swamp, and he needs help because of how deep it is. So an addict here is still fully, probably in the habit of allowing others to enable him. So what happens essentially is the family's coming running to help because they're just wants to watch their loved one drown. And so the addict essentially pushes the family member down under the water in an attempt to save their own life, to keep their head above the water. Now, this doesn't mean that they're a malicious, horrible person that wants to kill their family. It means that they're drowning. And as most people know, anyone who's drowning is going to grab onto anything that comes near them. And so there has to be a plan about saving someone from drowning. You can't just jump in and be taken under. Addiction has the power to make us act completely out of character. And that's not just true for the addict. That's true for the family members as well. So addiction doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's within a family system. And no family system is perfect. So whatever other problems existed before or were exacerbated by or created by the addiction are also going on. So other things like maybe some abuse or neglect or dishonesty or other learned behaviors that must be changed. And all of that doesn't change overnight. So the family in this stage is recognizing that there's a problem. So we're like, man, I'm really tired of falling in the swamp, and I'm really tired of being held under the swamp, and I'm getting real defensive about it, right? It's not about talking about enabling, is not about blaming or shaming. Both parties make choices in the matter, right? So families might still be making excuses or calling in for the addict or blaming other people or, and that is in effect shielding them from natural consequences. But they're starting to see that there's a problem, and that's not moving us forward toward the solution. So both people have choices in the enabling relationship. Just because you let me use you or you're willing to lay down as a doormat doesn't give me the right to do it. So I have to learn. I have to become aware of what I'm doing. So I have to be able to step back from myself and my situation and move from the subjective view and in a parent-child relationship of I'm not the kid that my parents need to save me from things. I'm an adult and a human being who makes decisions and therefore should deal with the natural consequences of those decisions. So this stanza represents preparation. They threw out a rope and began tug of war between the muck in my life and this damn reservoir. The rope was too weak, so they had to jump in. No regard for their safety. They wanted to win. So preparation is a stage where we start to make plans. We're not doing a whole lot. We're just kind of looking out there to see what we can do. And we're going to do it in the near future. And usually it's about within the next month. So here this represents that he recognizes that he needs to use their support. And he's also recognizing the sacrifices that they're willing to make. So an addict in preparation is gaining insight to change. He's exhibiting some willingness to change, considering powerlessness, and also experimenting with small changes. Now, this doesn't mean that all the changes make total sense, right? But it's in the spirit of going in the right direction. So some examples might be, if I drink whiskey, I'm going to drink whiskey only at night. So in the morning, I'm going to drink beer. Or I'm going to drink a pint instead of a fifth. Or If I use meth, and I know that if I stay up for 4 days, I start hallucinating, I'm going to just stay up for 2 days. Now, to someone who doesn't use drugs, and anyone really, that seems a little weird. But the point is that it's awareness. It's a recognition of a problem and a need for change. So it's in the right direction. So any move forward needs to be celebrated and recognized, and then, built on. So family members are also trying to make small changes, in that it also applies to them that they might not be the greatest small changes. But again, they're in the right direction. So an example might be rationing alcohol, or loosely making rules about curfew or financial responsibility expectations. Family members are also identifying resources and looking at different ways of coping with the situation. So everybody is kind of looking around to see what we're going to do. It also represents preparation. My mom dove head first deep into the pit. My father sprang second. We were all in the shit. Mom's head underwater and Dad's sinking down. I understood then that we all could not drown. So this represents more of that change within the system that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. Mom and Dad are trying to help, but still not sure how to go about it without sacrificing themselves. So they both jump in and start to go under. And the change here is that instead of letting the addict push him down under the water, they decided, well, let's swan dive in there. So maybe that'll help. Why that is a better solution than being held under the water, it's still not a viable solution for long-term change, right? So the addict realizes that this isn't going to help for everybody to come in here and drown. So he's also recognizing that addiction is consuming them all, and that it is becoming the energy that everything orbits around in the family. So the addict is starting to recognize the people, places, and things that trigger his desire to use. He might be looking into things for natural pain relief, or even trying to find a doctor that could have virtual meetings so that he can maybe address some anxiety or depression that he has going on. He is thinking about taking accountability and thinking about that plan that he is going to start soon. So the family members are also realizing that they may be playing a part in the cycle. And they're realizing that there are certain triggers to their responses. So things in the environment that happen in the relationship also that trigger them reacting in ways that they're not proud of, that are out of line with who they are as individuals and as parents. So this accountability actually creates hope, which is what helps us to continue to be motivated to move forward. Because the unfortunate truth, and something that's very hard to come to grips with, especially with addiction, and with parents, that we don't want to watch our kids drowning in a swamp, but if we can't realize that love alone isn't going to fix it, we can end up loving them to death, which I'm sure you've heard before. It's kind of like not teaching them to swim, and then putting them in the swamp with some floaties on. And so every unhealthy dynamic, every interaction that doesn't move us toward progress is like shoveling some sharp rocks and some sticks and some snapping turtles into the swamp. And eventually those floaties get punctured. And then the addict is sitting out there helpless. And the swamp is too thick. Now, again, this is not about blame or shame, because the addict has responsibility in this too. Because even if there's no family, you better believe the addict's going to get in the water, knowing he can't swim. He's going to put some floaties on, and the floaties represent his drugs. And eventually, the drugs are incapable of keeping him afloat. And unfortunately, ends up being the very thing that kills him. So this represents action. It was then that my family realized this too. If we kept on this way, we'd succumb to the slough. Mom grabbed a root and pulled herself free. Dad followed suit. It just had to be. With them out of danger and on solid ground, My nose just above water, I could now look around. The swamp is my guise, I'm an addict, you see. A fallout of choices is what surrounds me. Now this is the pinnacle of an addict's journey. That he realized that he's drowning in the swamp that he created. Now that doesn't mean that all of the muck in the swamp is his fault. But what it means is that he has to accept where he is. He has to accept what condition his condition is in, right? It's crucial to the development of humility and gratitude and resilience. It's great to have insight, to know you have a problem. But insight without action is not accepted. So we have to have all of those pieces of the puzzle. So an addict in early recovery in the action stage is admitting powerlessness, taking accountability, living in the present, accepting natural consequences, setting goals, and considering the future and creating boundaries. Families are admitting powerlessness also, connecting to resources like therapy, support groups, and hobbies that have nothing to do with addiction, so that they can start to develop their own autonomy and create a balance between that autonomy and togetherness within the family relationship, which is something that is necessary in all relationships, but very hard to do when you're drowning in a swamp of addiction, and a swamp that you didn't create. This also represents action. Let go of the blaming and wondering why. It's time to take action. If not, I will die. I clawed and I slung and I pulled myself free. I earned my way out of the voracious debris. My family prepared to be on the ready. Each step I take now is mindful and steady. A newfound respect for the swamp I created. It unveiled my strength and new life that awaited. Now, in this stage, the addict and the family are basically doing the same things as it relates to their position in the situation. So this is huge, because the addict gets it now. He realizes that quitting drugs is only one small part of being in recovery. He's now standing in the middle of the swamp, the water like this, so he can breathe. And that's great. And that's great that you stopped using drugs. But now you have to learn to live. Now you have to learn to walk through the consequences, walk through the swamp, right? So in order to do that, you need to create a perimeter of support. So hopefully you can see, and it's not important that you see everything that's written on there. You can see the image here, and I'll zoom in on that. This is a person in recovery that has a perimeter of support. So those orange stickers around him, that represents the perimeter of support. So now I'll just explain to you what that means. So when a person creating a perimeter of support, what they do is they first have to increase their self-awareness. They have to identify and align themselves with what they value. Then they have to identify people, places, and things that strengthen and protect their mind, body, and soul, their whole self. So that is what the perimeter consists of. So when in the swamp, the family members are standing on the shoreline. They're standing there with an arsenal of tools, and they are ready. They're ready to help. As long as it means that they are not going to get pulled in. So they will throw a life vest out when they see that their family member is working on their own to get themselves out of the swamp. It's not about abandoning anybody. It's about learning to give a hand up instead of giving handouts, right? Because that doesn't do anything to help anyone gain autonomy or independence or resilience. So gaining new perspective. Now, the person in addiction needs a perimeter of support, but so does the family members. If we have all of our eggs in one basket, and we're just, all of our energy is flowing into enabling or whatever it is that we're doing, we're essentially neglecting all other parts of ourselves, and we are open to attack from all directions, right? And we don't have a balance. So this creates balance. This creates the ability to have gratitude and remorse and set goals and actually achieve them and forgive yourself and others and acknowledge small victories. So when the family members are also doing this, they can see that, yes, it's sad. It's terrible to watch your family member have to go through the swamp and walk out of it because it's not hard. This sounds great in all roses, but action stage is hard and it's long because depending on how much swamp you created is going to dictate how thick the water is and how hard it is going to be to get out. So you're going to have to deal with getting a car, getting a job, getting a license, walking to work, whatever it is that you have to do. But when you can see the power and the resilience that is created of slinging off that muck and doing it on your own, then you go from feeling sorry for to being like, hell yeah, look at the power that is being created by that process. The strength that is coming out of that struggle. So we all have to be on board for that. We all have to understand it. So the journey doesn't stop here, and it can't, because if we don't continue to move through to maintenance, and this represents maintenance, my swamp is no longer a threat to elude. Connection to self and support now renewed. No longer oblivious, no longer afraid, no longer trapped in the swamp that I made. Caution we must as we continue from here through the journey of change, we can persevere. So this really exemplifies the point that we go from acting and doing all these things and getting our perimeter in place while we're in the swamp to now being out of the swamp, and we have a perimeter literally and figuratively around us that provides us support and options to deal with things that happen in life, because life will have struggle even after you've achieved your recovery. That's just the nature of life, but it doesn't have to take you out. So if we don't move all the way through the stages to maintenance, there's a high likelihood for relapse. And so here, we're not so much on this defense of always hiding around the corner from the big bad monster of addiction. More so, we have gained this strength and we are invested and we feel good about ourselves. And so we're like, come on, bring it on, give me some more power. How can I fortify the positions on my perimeter to become even stronger? Watch me regulate my emotions. Watch me improve my relationships, right? Becoming interested and amazed at the power of not only yourself, but the power of healing, the power of spiritual connection, the power of perimeter support. Those are basically all of those things. If we don't make it to maintenance and we get to that action stage and we're just going through the motions and slinging off some muck, and then we get really discouraged and it's too hard and wah, then we turn into something I'm sure you've heard called a dry drunk. Now, this doesn't only apply to people in addiction. Family members can be this way too. And essentially what that means is that now you're sober and miserable. So you're not learning to create a balance. You're not connecting to your mind, body, and soul. Now let me not convey, or let me convey that it's not an easy process. It's hard. And in the beginning of recovery, there's a little bit of forcing that has to be done within yourself. But the more connections you make, the better support and push that can be facilitated, right? And there's a little bit of, when we're changing things and we're stopping enabling, some people are going to get upset. But if we understand our motive and what we have in mind, and what we have in mind is progress for everybody and recovery, and that we are not going to contribute to the demise of anyone, somebody gets upset along the way, I'd rather you be upset than dead. So let's keep moving forward, and let's communicate and learn to be assertive. So if you have made it all the way to maintenance, then what you have done is survived the swamp of addiction. And so congratulations. And it's a much happier place to be. So that concludes my presentation. And I guess we will meet in the Q&A.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica. So really quick, if you're watching here live on Facebook, I am fixing to comment the link to the Q&A.
Here?
Yes, I'm here. Whoop. Yeah, sorry about that, Zoom guys. I was talking to
I can't
Facebook
hear you.
Live. Oh, you can't hear me. Can you hear
I
me?
can now. No, I can't.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I was talking to Facebook Live and completely ignoring the Zoom. So if you're watching Facebook Live, I commented the link, the Zoom room and password in the comments section. You can meet us there momentarily. If you're watching here on Zoom, I'm fixing to comment that to everybody as well. So I will give you each a few minutes to write that down. Jot down that meeting ID and that passcode, and then we will see everybody in the next Zoom room. So thanks everybody for being patient. I know that the live stream has been a little rocky. We got to do the best we can. Technology is great when it's working, and when it's not, it can be a little frustrating. So thanks for sticking with us. We will see you in the live Q&A where you can interact with Jessica and have some deep conversations if you need to. We'll see you there. All right, Jessica, I'll meet you in the room.